Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Licho Road Network. And this is the second episode that we are doing with our honorable guest, Mr. John. So, John, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, hi, my name's John Child. I'm a life coach from the UK, and it's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to say before we continue with the interview, I saw one of your videos earlier on where you were talking about connection and mobile phones and how people use mobile phones but they don't connect with the people around them. And I just wanted to say, I just thought that was a great video. I thought you made a great point, and it's something that's very important at the moment. There's a myth around technology and communication, and I understand we're using technology to cross a boundary here, but people use it, they get distracted by technology. Um, it enables them to be dismissive of social constructs which are damaging to them and to the people around them, because they're sat staring at their phones instead of asking the person next to them how they are and connecting with those people. So I really liked the fact that you'd done a video about that, and that you were talking about the sort of the myth of communication that surrounds technology and how that can be a problem. So I just wanted to say that before we went further, because I thought that was really important. And people, if they've not seen that video that you put out, I really thought that they should do.
Right. But it's now it's really easy to connect to the world, right? After the interventions of technology. But are you saying that the relationship is going worse?
Well, I think with technology, what's interesting is, and you know, every generation has a different way of connecting with people.
Hello.
And hello, can you hear me? Can you still hear me?
I can't hear.
You can. How's that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I can. Yeah.
So I think that technology has moved very, very quickly, and society has kind of morphed around that. But what's interesting is that technology like phones and computers, there's a lot of positives to that. Like what we're doing now, we're able to exchange ideas across continents. But there's another side to that, which is you can sit in a room with 3 or 4 people and nobody's talking because they're on their Facebook page, or they're arguing with somebody on Twitter about something that doesn't matter, you know. And these distractions are difficult, because what that does is it leads to a disconnect with ourselves. So while in the past you may have hit something you didn't understand about yourself, or you hit um, a sabotage, a self-sabotage. In the past, you might have spent some time sitting, working it through in your own mind, reconnecting with yourself. Whereas these days, it becomes a Twitter status and an argument on Twitter. And that's the damaging part of this. Because one of the things that really interests me is about purpose, but also about identity, whether it's and the difference between a social identity and an individual identity, our personal identity. Now, from a
That means.
sorry, go on.
Yeah. Okay. You may continue. You may continue.
Okay, so for example, there are an awful lot of theories about identity, but some of the main ones involve everybody has a core identity. So that's who you are inside, your values, your beliefs, how you operate as a person. And then there's a social identity, which is who you portray to the world, and the values and beliefs that are acceptable in the social system in which you live, and how those two things interact. So, to give you an example of this, in modern society, if you go onto any kind of entrepreneurial group on a web forum, most people, if asked what is your idea of success, will say something along the lines of a lot of money, a big house, car, whatever. Okay, it's kind of a standard answer. Now, that's a socially acceptable answer for what is success. But everyone's different, right? So how can everybody have the same idea of success? So this is where you get the instances of people who start to become successful and realize this isn't for me, this isn't happy. I'm not happy.
Yeah.
So but they don't understand why. And it's because they haven't understood the difference between who they really are and who they've decided or who they've agreed with society that they should be.
That means I thinking that the social identity is to be peeled back completely.
Yeah. What you're talking about is really um, peeling back the onion. So if everybody's different, and this realization came to me after I realized I became very successful in what I was doing at one point, and I realized I wasn't happy. And I said, right, well, I must have a purpose. I must have a reason for being here. And I don't know what it is. So, how do I find that? Now, in order to find that, what I realized was human beings as a species, we are human beings. So we have a lot of commonality. But as individuals, every individual person has a completely different experience of life. You have completely different experience of life to my experience of life. We live different parts of the world. We have different social structures, different values and beliefs, different levels of affluence, different family sizes, whatever. Everybody's circumstance is different, which means that for us to have a purpose, if we are to have, if humans have a purpose, then it has to be rooted in something that we all experience.
But in this world, I think the peel back of a social status is something that's not possible, right? Is it possible to make this to peel back the social status in this scenario or in this world? Is it in this
Well,
current world?
it depends what you mean by peeling back social status, because nobody's born knowing their social status, right? You're born as an energetic being. Okay, you're not, and then you learn the social state. You're taught by your social group what the norms are, what is acceptable behavior, what an acceptable look is, how to speak in your social group. And if you step outside of that, then you're taught that you've done something wrong. You need to readjust your behavior. But as an individual, as a person, you can say to yourself, is my behavior related to who I really am, or am I just trying to please my social group? So you can operate within a social structure. We all do. We all live in social structures, but those social structures aren't all the same. So your purpose and your identity, your actual inner identity, isn't related to social structure, because otherwise we'd all be under the same social structure. So there are only a very small number of things that we all experience. We all experience birth. We all experience love at some point in our lives, whether it's for a parent or for a partner or whoever. We all experience grief, and we all experience death of a loved one and our own deaths. So our purpose and our inner identity has to be, I believe, intrinsically linked somewhere in those four things, because they are species level experiences. Social constructs are just social constructs, they're man made. They may have traditions going back hundreds of years, but somebody thought them up. And they are not necessarily relevant to what's important to you individually. Now, you can operate within that social structure, but you can operate from a position of external validation. In other words, fitting in with the group for the sake of fitting in with the group. And or you can operate from the point of view of, I will do what's right for me, authentically myself. If it fits with what's right for the group, then that's fine. And if it doesn't, then I'll own my actions. I understand what the consequences are of stepping out of that social construct. Now, there's an interesting example. I've got two interesting examples. One is from my own life, and one is about bees. But from my own life, the example I'm going to give is, I, as you can see, have got ginger hair. Now, when I was growing up, it was quite unusual to have ginger hair in my particular school, and so it became a thing of ridicule. Okay, so I was quite young, and people used to call me Ginger Nut and all those usual hilarious things that people call people with ginger hair. So I learned that that was going to put me outside of my social group. Now, when you know what kids are like, it's important to be part of a group of friends and everything else. So how do you do that? Because I wasn't going to dye my hair, you know. But what I did do was I realized, you know what, people are making fun of me all the time. So when I started meeting people, I'd start meeting people, and immediately I'd say, hi, my name's John. And then I'd make a joke about my hair. You know? Now, I did that because it meant that they wouldn't do it. Because if I was the person making fun of me, they weren't going to do it. They wouldn't make fun of me. They can't. It's all gone. Because they can't put me on the outside if I'm already there. But what that does from a social point of view is that ingratiates me into the group. But it ingratiates me into the group within a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is, it's okay to put this guy down because he's putting himself down. Does that make sense?
The charge of them.
Yeah. So, and from my point of view, that was reinforcing to me, if I want to be part of this group, I've got to negate what's real for me. So where do I go there? I've left myself with no room to maneuver. And that's the real key to the point I'm trying to get across here, is if you work only with social identity, if you live your life through social identity without taking the time to sit and reconnect with who you are, and like you just said, peel back those levels of social identity. If you don't do that, you spend your life saying, it doesn't matter what I do as long as those people accept who I am.
But in this life, we have to do the personal identity, and we have to make it through like combining the social identity and the personal identity.
We do.
Right?
We do.
We can't. Then what do you mean by peel backing the social identity?
So what I mean is, when you put forward an action, when you find yourself in a situation where you exhibit a behavior or you put forward a point of view, I ask yourself, what's the motivation of putting this across? Is this something I really believe? Or is this something that I'm putting forward because somebody in my childhood told me this was the acceptable point of view? Now, you might live your entire life not asking yourself those questions and not have any problems whatsoever. But as a coach who specializes in working with identities, what you can find is it can create inner conflict. So you want to do something which is socially acceptable, which would give you a lot of social status, if you like, but you find yourself self-sabotaging because it doesn't resonate with who you are inside. And so whenever you find yourself self-sabotaging, if I can put my teeth back in, whenever you find yourself doing that, you need to be asking yourself, what is it that is stopping me do this? What is it that's not resonating with who I really am? And that's just as simple as sitting down and saying, what relates to who I really am and what relates to what have I just been taught? Okay. Now, the other example that I wanted to mention was about bees, and this is kind of an example of what we were just talking about, the fact that you can go through life and not really know what your purpose is, although you think you're meeting your purpose, and not really knowing that there's another level underneath the social identity that is much more important on a fundamental individual level. Okay, so bees, as you know, they have a very well-defined social structure. They live in hives. They have they're highly habitualized, so they have extremely rigid routines, and they go out, and basically their function is, if you're a bee, your function is go out, get food, come back to the hive and build honeycomb, right? So for an individual
Yeah,
bee,
right.
that's their job. As far as they're concerned, their purpose in life is go get food, come back to the hive, give some to the queen, procreate, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But from a species point of view and from a planetary point of view, that is not the bee's purpose at all. The bee's purpose is it pollinates the entire planet. If the bees all died off, the planet would die. Right? That's why there's all the scientific hoo-ha at the moment, because bees are dying
Yeah,
off.
that means
So so actually, from a wider perspective, the bee's purpose on this planet is to keep the planet alive. The
the
bee doesn't.
purpose of a man, right?
Sorry, say again.
The purpose of a living, right?
Well, the purpose of the bee's life is to
Right.
keep the planet breathing, because it moves, it pollinates all of the plants. Excuse me. But if you're a bee, you don't even know that. If you're a bee, you just want to eat and bring things back to the hive. That is your purpose. Now, this, I hope you can understand the sort of the corollary here, which is all species are the same, and potentially, as an individual, your purpose in life, you may have what you think is a purpose in life, which is a socially
Right.
accepted purpose. The bee's socially accepted individual purpose is to go get food, bring it back, look after the queen.
Yes, right.
But from a planetary level, And from a biology level, that's not the bee's purpose at all. As a species, the bee's purpose is to pollinate the planet. The bee is never ever going to know that.
Planet means what you mean? What you
The,
mean by pollinating the plant?
when a bee feeds from a plant, and it takes nectar from the plant, and then it moves on to another plant. That pollinates the plant, and
Yeah.
that's how plants proliferate.
Yeah.
So that as the bee
Yeah.
species,
That's the base.
without the plants, we don't breathe. Our air changes. So that at a species level, the bee's purpose in life as a species is that pollination. But the bee doesn't know. The bee thinks its purpose is, I'm just going to go get food, bring it back to the hive. Now that is the same as saying we don't necessarily know what our purpose is if we're only working through social identity. Because the bee's social identity is go get food. Okay?
Right.
Our socially accepted identity is based around what is socially acceptable for you, your group of friends, your group of, your political sphere or country sphere or whatever. But that's not the same as our purpose as a species, which we are not given to understand in the same way as a bee doesn't know what their species purpose is. And it's not the same as who you are inside. Now, if you believe, as I do, that we don't necessarily know what our species purpose is, but our purpose has to be linked to our individual identity, then it makes your social identity completely irrelevant when it comes to moving forward in your own life. It doesn't mean that you can't live in those social constructs, because we all have to, but it does mean that you can look at it in a slightly different way, and you can look at things in a much more objective way. Just because something is traditional doesn't make it right for you, and just because something is new from a social sphere, it doesn't necessarily make it right for you. In the same way as when we started this conversation, we were talking about technology and mobile phones. There's a positive use and a negative use. Well, that's the same with everything that you come into contact with. You can use that in a positive way or a negative way. But the only way that you know whether it's right for you and positive is if you spend time with yourself. And say, right, what do I actually want? What is important to me? And the way you do that is by stripping away all of those things that you think are important, all of those things that people have told you your whole life you should be striving for, and just saying, what do I really enjoy doing? What brings joy to me? How can I?
That's what I have to do.
Say again?
I have to do what brings me joy, right?
Yeah, I would say so, because at the basic level, what brings you joy is where your passion comes from. And if you believe that you have an individual purpose, it has to resonate with who you are inside, with your actual identity, with those values and beliefs that you are made up from.
But as I'm raised from a social community, and I couldn't rise, and I couldn't develop my thinking, my thoughts, and everything is created from my society, right? And so I have something to do to my society. Maybe can we say it as giving them a social identity rather than a personal identity? What could we do for society then?
Well, the thing is, I also believe, and you're right. I think there are. Um, it's entirely possible that your internal identity and your purpose is to contribute to that society and that social system. I certainly believe that. That's why I'm a coach. My driver, the thing that brings me joy, is helping other people. So I'm not saying that you necessarily have to operate outside of that society. I'm not saying that you stop contributing to that society, because actually, the way that you can help other people is to contribute to that society in an open way, but from a position and from a point of view of internal authority and knowing who you are internally. So what I was saying there was that you can contribute much more valuably to society and to your social the people around you that you care about, if you know who you are authentically, because it means that you can speak your truth. You can speak your truth, not somebody else's. And once you do that, if you reconnect with yourself and sort of say, right, well, let's peel back all this rubbish that I've kind of learned about myself over the years and get back to who I used to be when I was fun and when the thing I enjoyed most was spinning around in the street before I fell over, which used to be my favorite thing. When you can get back to that and then say, right, well, now I know who I am and what I really value. Now I can contribute to my community, my society in a much healthier way. Then you can speak your truth, and you can do it without worrying about what other people are going to think of it, because you believe it. You can back it up. You're not just saying something because 3 or 4 generations have been saying it for years and you're not quite sure why. You know why you believe it, because it's in you. You were there. So you can drop all that. You can drop any sort of feelings of low self-esteem, because you'll just be you. And you can walk through the world knowing that you might not be the best person in the world. I'm certainly not the best person in the world, but I'm the best me there'll ever be. And that's really important, to know that nobody else can bring what you can bring.
Nice.
But if you focus solely on your social identity and fitting in, you're never going to be able to bring that to the table, because everything you're going to do, you're going to second guess. Is someone going to make fun of me for saying this or for doing this? Is someone going to disagree with me? Well, if you really believe in who you are and what you're saying, it doesn't matter if people disagree with you. You don't even have to argue about it. You just have to say, this is how it is for me. If it works for you, then it works for you. If it doesn't matter. You do what works for you.
Yeah, but whenever we do things that makes joy, then it's necessary to make that to look that whether it hurts somebody or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You have, if you are, everybody has a conscience, right? Whether they choose to listen to it or not, everybody has a conscience. And I think you're absolutely right. If you're being true to yourself, then your conscience becomes a guide. And I believe that's your conscience is a very, very good indicator of your personal identity, because it tells you where your moral stance is. So you're absolutely right. I absolutely 100% believe that you have the right to do what is right for you, but you also have the responsibility to make sure that the people around you are safe, well, secure, and you're. But if you're living that way, you shouldn't be doing anything. You shouldn't find yourself doing anything that deliberately hurts anybody anyway. But if you accidentally
If you
hurt,
understand your
everybody accidentally hurts somebody at some point. You can't go through life and not do that. But it's recognizing it and making reparation for it, apologizing, whatever, you know, and being upfront, just being honest. And that's really the key to everything we're talking about here. If you're living from a perspective, from a point of view of your core identity, then you're living honestly. And that's the key. If you're living an honest life that brings you joy, then you're going to be contributing to your community, living a life that you would never have expected you'd be living, because the things that you think are important now probably aren't that important to you when you've done that work. And
right.
so
Then
does
it
that
could
does that make
create
sense?
right. Then it could create joy, and if you understand the personal identity, you won't hurt somebody. That's the point, right?
Yeah, just yeah.
If you,
If you're working to create joy in your life, and from an honest point of view, you're listening to your inner voice, your conscience, which is intrinsic to your inner identity, not your socially constructed identity, then you're going to be bringing that positive energy into your community, helping people anyway. Because if we're honest, it feels good to help people anyway. I mean, for me, and obviously the whole point of what we're talking about is everybody's different, but for me, my joy is helping people.
ah,
That's what brings me joy. So, it's a win-win for me because I'm always going to do that.
okay. So let me ask you the last question. That
Mm.
do you mean that build backing the social identity means to build back the identity that's given to you by the society, or something else?
So, well, it could be your social identity is the identity that you present to the world that is accepted by the people around you. Now, that could be the society you live in, it could be your friendship group, could be your family. Okay. Now you're taught the rules of that identity and the things that people will accept when you're taught right from wrong by your parents, when you are made aware of what the law is that you have to adhere to, what is acceptable behavior in your community. So when you peel that back, when I say peel that back, I don't mean go against it and just do everything opposite. What I mean is recognize that that's where that comes from and ask yourself if that works for you on an individual basis.
So yeah, you may continue.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't mean ignore it and I don't mean leave it alone. What I mean is when you catch yourself, when you notice a behavior that you think is socially constructed. So um how can I what let me think of something here. Um so yeah, if you've got a behavior that you spot, something maybe that maybe it could be something habitual. So it could be, you you go to work, you go to work at this job, right? Certain things I know. I've had clients before where their families have sort of, for example, um, I had a client who was an accountant. Okay, now the reason they were an accountant, it turns out, was because their father was an accountant and their father before them was an accountant. And as they were growing up, they were encouraged, you should be an accountant. Okay. So the guy
Yeah.
became an accountant. His social identity included being an accountant.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't want to be an accountant.
Yeah.
He was miserable being an accountant, but he was an accountant for years and couldn't understand. He'd got, the nice car and everything else, and he'd got everything that he'd ever strived for by being an accountant. But the accountancy part of that was part of his social identity. It didn't bring him
Yeah.
joy. It wasn't part of.
Yeah. Right.
So he thought about it for a while. He said, "Well, actually, what I want to do is I want to be, I want to do an outward bound course. I want to teach outward bound, survival skills to people." So he went to do that.
Yeah.
Now he could have had exactly the same life doing that from the beginning and being true to
Right.
himself. But what he'd found was he was getting more and more miserable, and people were noticing while he was being an accountant because that's not part of who he was. But until he'd done that work and said, "Why am I an accountant?" Well, I'm an accountant because everybody around me, my social group, accepted me as an accountant.
Right. And
Now,
he doesn't intend to do.
and so that's what he did. Now, the interesting thing about this is when he changed careers, some of those people that accepted him as an accountant said, "You've changed who you are. You're not who you were anymore." And some people couldn't adjust. He lost some friends. Well, he lost those friends, but which is sad. But he created, he reconnected with himself.
Right.
So
That's the most important.
yeah, exactly. He was able to live an honest, joyful life. And the friends that were really his friends, they came along with him. If you lose people, because whenever you move or change any aspect of your identity or your behavior, you're likely to find some of the closest people to you object because you're becoming something that they're not used to. They're comfortable with um, your socially accepted identity, and they're comfortable with your faults. So when you discover that you've been living externally and you correct that, some people, because it takes away their excuses. If you can do it, so can they, but they don't want to do it.
You cannot completely fulfill the society to in order to live a life with joy.
If in order to contribute, I think as a parting, as a sort of a parting shot, if you like, in order to commit and to bring the maximum you can to your community and to your social group and to your society, if you like, and to bring the most benefit to that, you have to do it from a place of being true to yourself. And to be true to yourself, it has to come from inside. It can't be from an external view of who you should be. It has to come from, this is who it has to radiate out. We're energetic beings. So it has to be, if you're putting an energy into your community, it has to be a positive energy and it has to be honest, because otherwise it won't sustain you. You'll be miserable. And what you think you're bringing to your community, you won't.
Right.
Does that
So
make sense?
yeah, that makes sense. That's the let's conclude the show. And had a great time talking with you, and you point out the need of finding your inner soul and working with honest. And thank you for that. And thank you for allowing a time with our listeners. So thank you for that.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. If anybody wants to contact me for any reason, I do have a website, which is www.zoomlifecoach.uk. I'm always happy to hear from people who have heard me interviewed. Um, really enjoyed the interview, and I look forward to watching it back.
All right. So thank you. That's the end of the show.